Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show on POD TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today's guest we have Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Yep.
Okay.
Glad to be here. Yeah, there I am. Yeah.
As always. And Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Great to see you, Ivan. And let's start with the short movie clip that you would like to show us, please.
Yeah. Let's start the video.
Okay, let's do it.
Mark, please start it.
Okay.
Okay, maybe we will listen.
May have to go to finger puppets.
About the morale of Ukrainians today. This, that video was taken on February 27, 2022. 18 months later, Ukraine has suffered the loss of so many civilians and soldiers, so many millions displaced. Young people perhaps beginning to think, what is my future? Do you worry about their morale?
I'm worried about your singers that will have to learn the things I've learned. Now I'm closer than 1,000 miles away in Ukraine. I'm here with you and you guys watching me on your TV. I'm very worried that you don't see your neighbor, close neighbor in me, if you don't. Because if you do, give me all the weapons you would give to your boys to protect you from the evil. And if you won't give it to me, then your sons and your brothers and your singers and your writers will become machine gunners and drone pilots like I did. Consider this. And morale is only one. The only task of a normal defense part as a soldier is to defend women and kids, no matter what nations they are of.
But Andrei, it's easy for me to say because I'm not where you are, I'm in London, but looking from the outside, Putin appears to be determined to fight this war as long as it takes for him to achieve what he would call a victory. Russia has the scale, the size, the men, the weaponry that Ukraine cannot match in pure numbers.
Mm-hmm. If we all agree this guy is a war criminal, then we have to take him dead or alive, and that's going to be the end of this war. It's easy.
Wow, he says exactly what it is to end this war. He is right 100%. Now, about losses, I would like to mention, if I haven't done before, that if we assume that the losses are in numbers the same for Russians and Ukrainians, let's assume, I'm not saying that that's the case, but let's assume. But there is a great difference in the quality of men that Ukraine is losing compared to those in Russia. Ukrainians are losing their cream of the nation, the most brave, talented, gifted, well-trained young people, whereas Russia is using mostly drunks, inmates, jailers from jails, people who are doing nothing well in their life because their lives are miserable. They're not bringing you people from the Red Square in Moscow or Nevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg. No, they're bringing you people from all small towns, somewhere thousands of kilometers away from Moscow. And that are the people that Putin said himself, look, what's an alternative? you'll die from alcohol or accidental shooter or car accidents or whatever. Here you have alternative. You can die in Ukraine defending your great motherland. So these are the people who completely helpless, who are disoriented, who don't have a decent life, who don't have even normal toilets in their house, and who are drinking every day. This type of people losing Russia, unlike Ukraine. So unfortunately, the number game is not exactly the number game as we think. It's a quality, and the quality is quite horrifying. And Ivan, what do you think on this subject?
First of all, luckily, the casualties are not the same.
Yes.
Thanks to the Western weapons, thanks to the highest morale of Ukrainian soldiers, and sometimes when they have more experience, they're well trained, better trained than Russian soldiers. They had more time to prepare. Then we have less casualties than the Russia has. But anyway, you're right that we are losing the best, while Russia is sending the worst to die in Ukraine. We've discussed on our previous shows that Russia, they're not considering any casualties. They consider their own people like resource, like oil, like gold, like iron, or any other fossil resources that they have, and Russian people are just a kind of resource for them, and that was always. Actually, if you look back into the history, into the war of the young Ukrainian Republic, which appeared after the collapse of the Russian Empire in the beginning of the 20th century, then also the best of Ukrainians, of nation, defended Kiev, defended Ukraine, and probably you heard the story about Heroes of Krut, when the battle near Krut station has taken place, and the young cadets, actually students of the university, so they took guns and they tried to stop the Red Army, which was advancing on Kiev in order to conquer it, where they have the armored trains, they had artillery, they had a lot of people like peasants, like those proletarians, factory workers, which they mobilized very quickly to trying to grab as much as possible of the collapsing Russian Empire in order to form that Soviet Union, which was just appearing at that time. And now Russia is doing the same tactics. They're grabbing as much resources as possible in order to restore Soviet Union in its previous borders. And that is really a problem. The problem is that if Ukraine will fail in this battle, then Russia will go further. They will attack Poland, because Poland was a part of the Poland was a part of the Soviet Union, and the rest of the country was in Warsaw Bloc and a satellite of the Soviet Union. And today there was a military parade in Poland, in Warsaw. They're celebrating the day of Polish Army, and this day in 1920, Polish Army defeated the Red Army, and they've signed an agreement with the Soviet Union that time. And this today they've brought all their possible armed forces on that military parade. It was the biggest military parade for the last 30 years. And it was arranged in order to show Russia the power, that Poland has that power to stop Russia. And the only, we've also discussed before, that the only argument is to stop this war is to show Russia power, to show power Putin. And like that Ukrainian rock star Andriy Khlyvnyuk said in the video we've seen in the beginning, we just need all the weapons you may give us to our soldiers, because otherwise your soldiers your singers, your writers, your actors will have to take weapons and defend against the Russia or China, powered with the alliance with Russia, who was not failed in that war. So it's something like that.
Okay, Ivan, thank you so much. And I would like to ask Jonathan, one question is that this war is taking place not only on the battlefield, as we know, but in politics and in media, social media including, and so on. Most people, when they read something about the war in Ukraine, they are not going deeply to analyze who is the author that they are reading, what's his expertise, what is he trying to say, how much you can trust to those. So they read everything, whatever is in front of them. So right now, the recent Ukrainian advance is being criticized in the media, including the Western media, the American media, that it's too slow, the Ukrainians are not properly trained, that the Western tactics of the fighting in the war, Ukrainians are not following these tactics, or so on. It's indeed slow, but not because Ukrainians are not properly trained or they don't follow the tactics. But there are the big differences. It's slow because of by withholding the most of the required weaponry from Ukraine, Russians used that time to build incredible fortifications, the mining field, which is incredibly intense and not easy to penetrate, although they are being penetrated. My point, though, is that essentially two things. Ukrainians are asked to do something what no other army in the world could do against these Russian fortifications, trying to attack very strong enemy without superiority in the air and even parity, for that, if it makes any sense. And the second point is that Ukrainians are trying to save as many soldiers of their own as possible, and they're trying to frustrate Russian defense with attacks in different points, and that's also being successful, but that somehow is not being relayed to the audience in the West, in the United States. So the question is being, Jonathan, do you think that the Western doctrine, which West is accusing now Ukraine not to follow, in fact, maybe not working in these conditions where minefields, the trenches were being tremendously strong built or so on? Maybe Ukrainians have to invent some kind of a new doctrine of fighting the modern war, which the West hasn't fought it in dozens of years. The real war that the West was fighting, the last one, was in Normandy in 1944. What they fight it after that? Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and all that stuff. And that strategy could be applied against Russia and Ukraine. What do you think, John?
Okay, first of all, the Western military analysts are overlooking the fact that the Ukrainians have successfully adapted their offensive and their tactics to the Russian enemy, and they are making progress towards, as I pointed out before, towards severing the link between the Crimea and Russia. They are still making progress toward that, and that these Western analysts do not appreciate the fact that once that severance is achieved, that will constitute a major operational defeat for Russia, that they will lose the Crimea, that it will fall into Ukrainian hands, and it's just a matter of then the Ukrainians going in and mopping up what Russian occupation forces exist within the Crimea, and it will constitute a major political victory for the Ukrainian leadership, and tend to reinforce Western willingness to keep supplying them with weapons and keep supplying them with the necessary material in order to achieve final victory. The West does not appreciate, or does not appreciate the fact that in their doctrine depends a great deal upon material superiority, a vast material superiority and technological superiority, a superiority which the Ukrainians do not have, but which they have been able to adapt what they have been given. They have just demonstrated a superior capability for improvising and making the best use of what they have. And so they've been able to execute a very cautious offensive with due regard for minimizing their own casualties, because unlike the Russians, they have greater regard for the lives and safety of their soldiers and people than do the Russians, who are losing soldiers at a much greater rate than the Ukrainians, and the fact that that casualty rate is likely to increase in favor of the Ukrainians as the Russians keep pouring in reserves. They're not going to be of higher quality. They're going to continue using people of lesser and lesser quality, trying to overwhelm with numbers. And the Ukrainians, by being cautious and concentrating on the main objective, which is, in this case, first the severance of Russia from Crimea. Once that occurs, then the game changes. The game changes again. And Putin will be confronted with a stark choice. Either because the red line will have been crossed in his view, and the visible loss of Crimea, severance of Crimea, will bring a crucial decision point for the Russian leadership. Either they go nuclear or they go home. And that really is what the West is downplaying for whatever reasons I'm not really sure of, but I am becoming increasingly skeptical about the opinions of some Western military analysts who claim that the offensive is not going as fast as they anticipated. And just what rate did they anticipate? Well, how fast did they think this was going to go?
I would recommend such generals who provide these comments to send to Ukrainian front and give them an army or some kind of a unit without aviation, without ATACMS missile, and with all the trenches and minefields. Okay, Mr. General, go ahead and fight and kill everybody. How would he do it?
Yeah, he's not good. You would not send an American unit into Ukraine without the requisite technological material superiority. As a matter of fact, in the Second World War, you notice that when the Americans they mobilized their population, the service that they gave maximum strength to was the Navy. The Navy and the Marines, they gave them maximum allocation. And then they gave the Air Force maximum allocation that they requested. And the service that got the least amount of allocation was the Army. They wanted to, essentially, by giving the armed forces a superior Air Force and a superior Navy and superior firepower, essentially they would use the Air Force as a gigantic club to beat the Axis forces over the head with, and compensate for the fact that they did not have numerical superiority. I mean, essentially when the Allies invaded in Normandy, they used to cover their air supremacy. They did not just have air superiority; they had air supremacy, And before they conducted any offensive, they just bombed the living daylights out of the Axis forces in front of them and had tactical air superiority. And so the American forces since World War II have never had to fight without air superiority, even air supremacy. So they have no experience with having to fight with air parity or lack of superiority. So it is very disingenuous for Western observers, and particularly American observers, to complain about the lack of progress, when in fact, the fact that the Ukrainian armed forces are making any progress at all, and in fact are making steady progress towards what I contend is the decisive objective, the Sea of Azov, and cut that link between Crimea and Russia. That is what the Ukrainians should be given due credit for. And this should not affect, the Ukrainians are fully aware that they need this type of significant operational victory in order to reinforce and win a significant political victory and prevent the Russians from being able to wait out the Ukrainians and give the Russians a victory on the political front, that which they could not possibly attain on the battlefield.
So, Jonathan, this is really strange that this is U.S. generals are having a short memory. They don't memorize what they've been taught about 1944 and how the victory was achieved, what you just explained, or they are useful idiots brainwashed by Russian propaganda who are now playing a card that, well, let's wait, Trump will become a president and everything will go our way and the states will stop.
Well, they're doing what the Confederates were counting on in the American Civil War in 1864. They were hoping for a political victory by McClellan in the Democratic Party, who was essentially a peace candidate, and would have recognized the Confederacy. That's what the Confederates were counting on. They were counting on a political victory, and dragging out the war just long enough so that the North would become tired of trying to subdue the South. Here, we have an analogous situation here in the Russian-Ukrainian war. The Russians are now being denied military victory on the battlefield and facing the possibility of a significant operational defeat with the Crimea, that they are counting on dragging out the war long enough and inflicting enough punishment so that the Western political allies of Ukraine will become tired of supporting Ukraine and will eventually succumb to the temptation of peace at any price.
Jonathan, so what do you think about the political situation in the United States and the election of 2024? Is that Biden needs his victory of Ukraine, but not now, sometimes next year, preferably around summer of next year, so it's close enough to election, and there is still war going on for another several months, and here and there, and finally Ukrainian got its victory thanks to our Joseph Biden, so Biden will continue to be re-elected and will be a president.
I'm
imagining it.
That may be his calculation, and I'm not really sure about what his calculation is.
Nobody knows.
But it is not. It is not by all means It is not by all means a certainty that the Ukrainians will follow that schedule.
Yeah.
There is every good chance that Ukraine could achieve that operational victory of severing Crimea from Russia before the end of this year, and
correct.
that will throw all the calculations and strategizing of the Western allies into a cocked hat. It will then confront say we either pursue this to a successful conclusion, and of course you can bet that the Russians will threaten nuclear use. I mean, that is what their nuclear forces are. They are nuclear intimidation forces. That is how they translate deterrence. Ustrashenia. And people and the West tends to overlook this too. I mean, they tend to fall into the trap of mirror imaging. Russian nuclear forces do not have a defensive purpose. They are intended to intimidate, to apply pressure, to give them leverage and freedom of action to use their own military forces. And so that's what they've been doing all along, ever since the beginning of the war. And that is what they will continue to do until they are compelled by operational reality on the battlefield to accept defeat, however reluctantly.
But they are very interesting that Ukrainians are being able to defeat all those Russian stories about their incredible weapons like Kinjal, Iskander, and all this wonderful. How's it
Well,
called? Wunderwaffe.
well, the Ukrainians' use of the Patriot ballistic missile defense system has reinforced and justified all the Russian fears of U.S. technology, and particularly the Patriot system, which I pointed out before. The Russians have been concerned about the U.S. Patriot system since back mid 1985, when it was first, and I was there when it was first deployed in Germany, and they were
not as good as they're now. They were just first samples, really.
That they had a much lower interception rate back then, and also the Patriot back then did not have what we would call a mission kill. When a Patriot intercepted a Scud missile, for example, in the Persian Gulf War, the Patriot was able to knock the incoming Scud missile off course, which in the Patriots, by the Patriots calculation, that's a success. It means it's not going to hit the Patriot battery. It did not mean that the Scud missile was absolutely destroyed, or that its warhead could no longer explode. You still had cases of warheads exploding, but not exactly at the target at which they were aimed.
Yes.
However, the perception, and this was important, the perception of the West and its allies then was that the Patriot system was effective enough that it blunted the apparent effectiveness of the Scud missile attacks, and it also discouraged Israel from intervening. It basically convinced Israel that they did not need to intervene actively, because Saddam Hussein was trying to spread the war to make it a larger war, including Israel, which would have energized other Arab allies in the region and led to a much messier conflict. The Patriot was instrumental in blunting the apparent effectiveness of the Scud missile attacks, and even though they weren't perfect, Raytheon continued to introduce product improvements in the Patriot, much so that in the intervening period between 1991 and now 2022, Patriots are much more effective, much closer to that 100% interception rate, which makes possible, I contend, in the post-war period, that will make possible, along with upgrades to the U.S. Space Force to include a space fleet, to make possible a global ballistic missile defense system.
That would be wonderful. Jonathan, tell me, is Patriots are fundamental in Israel's Iron Dome defensive system?
Well, the Iron Dome, they have their own ballistic missile defense system, and certainly they would make use of Patriot, and they can integrate them into their defense system. Mm-hmm. And now the demonstrated that this has a nice additional effect. The demonstrated effectiveness of Patriot in the Russian-Ukrainian war also shows to other nations how ineffective their missile attacks, if they are contemplating any, against Israel or any of our other allies, how it's good advertising for Raytheon. It's great advertising for Raytheon. Look at our wonderful ballistic missile defense system,
worth millions and millions of dollars.
It said this will effectively protect your country.
Ivan, our last question for today's program. With all the recent attacks on civilians, including Odessa, Western Ukraine, how population, the people of Ukraine, feel about fighting Russians and to get their freedom from Russia?
Feeling the same, because those terroristic attacks, they are not stopping Ukrainians from fighting. They're making us even more and more angry, and making us donating more money on Ukrainian army in order.
Yeah, I've heard they already donated over $100 million. The Ukrainian civilians, and they're not very rich.
And while Western countries are not provided us with the long-range weapons in order to hit the objects behind the Russian front lines on the Russian territories, Ukrainian volunteers are gathering millions of dollars of donates from Ukrainian people in order to produce those handmade drones, those water drones which attacked Russian Black Sea. And they were also produced on donations from Ukrainians and from Ukrainian companies. The previous company where I worked in, they've donated on one of those water drones like $10,100 it costed. Yeah, it was a really nice investment for a company, because those donations they're making victory a little bit closer, and each Russian attack on Ukrainian territory makes Ukrainians donate even more and more, because we understand that we can. Unfortunately, we were in some issues. I'm not talking about everything, but in some issues we are one-on-one with our enemy. And we don't have all the resources which we needed to stop this war. So we have to do something on our own.
Well, you see, what I would suggest that there are two realities in this war. One, obviously, Russia is a much bigger country, it's a stronger country, it has nuclear arsenal, it has number of people available to fight the war is 5-6 times bigger than Ukraine, and they have many more weapons or so on. So therefore, how Ukraine is there to fight Russia and even hope to free their territory from Russians. But so, because of the same reasons, everybody believed in the West, in the United States, that Ukraine will fall in 3 days, because how they can withstand the mighty Russian attack. What's happening today is the same thing. Russians still have, if you logically analyze the number of available fighters in Russia, but nobody talks about quality of those fighters. The training that Ukrainians got, nobody talks about that. So Russia can potentially have 5 million people. Ukraine can potentially have only 1 million people. 5 million people always win against 1 million people.
Well, as a matter of fact, Sasha, another good analogy here would be the Russo-Finnish War, the Winter War of 1939 and 1940, when Stalin attacked Finland, and people were thinking, oh boy, the tiny Finland against the mighty Russian Soviet army, and the Finns inflicted devastating casualties on the Soviet army and made it very, very costly. Eventually, Stalin threw enough troops at them so where the Finns were forced to sue for an armistice. The Finns maintained their independence, though. They maintained Stalin got the territory that he wanted, additional territory to protect Leningrad, but the people forget. Putin may be counting on this same historical analogy to see him through on the current Ukrainian war. But what must happen is that the Ukrainians need to inflict a decisive operational defeat. And the key to that, it is clear, at least from my perspective, is to sever the Crimea from Russia. Once that happens, and once the Russian occupation forces in Crimea are compelled to surrender, then you have a major operational defeat that will speak volumes to the world about who's really. That's the key, and we must not forget that. And the Ukrainians are making progress.
Jonathan, I think that Zelensky and Zaluzhny are listening to our program because
Really?
so far, I believe that so far Ukrainian army follows all your advices, and I think that's what's happening. Ivan, you agree?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, true.
Why not?
Well, with that, I would like to thank you, Jonathan and Ivan, for today's program. And I'm looking forward to see you next time, Friday, same place, same time, with even better news. Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.